Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 6th of June, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us Northern exposure from north of the border.
Well, we'll get kicked off with Boris. And is Boris going to be leader for very much longer? Well, let's see what Graham Brady had to say this morning.
The threshold of 15% of the parliamentary party seeking a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister has been passed. Therefore, a vote of confidence will take place within the rules of the 1922 committee. That vote will take place this evening in the House of Commons between 6 and 8 o'clock, and we will announce the result shortly thereafter. There will be arrangements for proxy votes for any colleagues who can't be present in person in Westminster, and we'll notify colleagues of those arrangements in the near future.
So Graham Brady, of course, chairman of the 1922 committee, they make these kinds of decisions. So there we go. Boris is going to face a no confidence vote. But I wanted to sort of get a bit behind what's going on here rather than just having a look at the shenanigans in Parliament. But if we look at the Daily Express, I'm just going to read a little bit from one of their articles from yesterday, that a group of major Tory donors and Rebel MPs plan to launch Operation Boot Boris this week in a bid to persuade grassroots Conservative members to help force the Prime Minister out. And the Express is arguing that the reason for that is because they're concerned that there's a coalition of Remain MPs building within Parliament that are going to try and get us back into the EU again. So, well, we'll come on to that in a little bit, but I wanted to focus on this Operation Boot Boris, and they're being described as a group of major Tory donors and backbench MPs. And I want to put this article from the Grey Zone up. This came out a couple of weeks ago. It's called Operation Surprise. Leaked emails expose secret intelligence coup to install Boris Johnson. Now, this seems to be one of the email dumps that led to the exposure of the Integrity Initiative, also the exposure of Foreign Office activities in the Middle East and so on. These email dumps seem to have been coming thick and fast over the last couple of years. But the article here starts, leaked emails reviewed by the Grey Zone reveal possibly criminal plot by pro-Leave elites. And they go on to talk about intelligence cabal infiltrated UK civil service thanks to centrally placed mole. Ex-MI6 chief Richard Dearlove pitched espionage operations targeting civil service and campaign groups. Fake Democratic Party fronts run by CIA veterans were proposed to infiltrate pro-Remain groups. Cabal sought to spy on and disrupt Prime Minister's top Brexit negotiator. That's Theresa May, by the way. And shadowy billionaires funded effort in total secret, and so on. So let's just have a look and see what they have to say here. They said that the wide-ranging conspiracy was managed by a shadowy cabal of hardcore Leavers to sabotage former Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal, remove her from office, replace her with Boris Johnson, and secure a hard withdrawal from the EU. They say the cabal appears to be led by Gwythian Prince, a member of the Chief of Defence Staff Strategy Advisory Panel, former NATO and Ministry of Defence Advisor, and board member of pro-Brexit group Veterans for Britain. He is joined by former MI6 Chief Richard Dearlove, who is frequently dubbed C in the leaked emails, a reference to the operational initial granted to all heads of British Foreign Intelligence Service. At one point, Dearlove and Prince sought to recruit their apparent friend Henry Kissinger and his consulting firm as transatlantic lobbyist for their version of Brexit. It goes on to say, Dearlove's MI6 1999 through 2004 tenure was typified by controversy, thanks largely to deceptions he advanced to justify the war in Iraq. The longtime spook played a prominent role in selling that illegal war to the media and politicians. Dearlove was ultimately singled out for censure in an official inquiry into the conflict, which found that he had passed on bogus intelligence, testifying to Baghdad's non-existent weapons of mass destruction directly to then Prime Minister Tony Blair. So, I mean, this is all correct so far. And it goes on to say, on September the 21st, 2018, the day after a deeply embarrassing EU summit in Austria, in which member state leaders lined up to condemn Theresa May Checker's plan, Prince emailed Blackwell and the Clodes. The Clodes these are some of the Tory backers that we're talking about here. To inform them he and Dearlove supported a strategy to put intolerable pressure on May, which would serve to keep her in office but not in power. And the subject line of Prince's email read, "Our active measures strategy, highly sensitive." It goes on to say, it is uncertain what this entailed, whether it was successful. In December 2018, however, Prince met in secret with Evelyn Farr, a civil service employee who had previously been identified in UK media as a pro-Brexit activist, who moonlighted as a historian. Writing under the pseudonym Caroline Bell, Farr publicised privileged information on Brexit negotiations for outlets including Conservative Woman, as well as pro-leave outfits like Briefings for Brexit and Brexit Central. She also passed highly sensitive behind-the-scenes details to the cabal. These disclosures may well have amounted to a breach of the Official Secrets Act, for which penalties are severe. The cabal sought to influence Johnson's thinking in other ways as well, it goes on to say. During the leadership campaign, for example, Dearlove described himself as preoccupied with feeding briefings on national security to Boris, praising his student as a quick and able and an excellent classical scholar. He said he felt reasonably confident he would succeed in convincing Johnson's team to block Huawei's participation in Britain's 5G network. The former MI6 chief has long promulgated conspiracy theories that the Chinese tech giant functions as a global spying network for the Communist Party of China. And the article goes on to say that more recent emails show Prince's enthusiasm for the Prime Minister has considerably waned. In January of this year, he wrote to Dearlove predicting Johnson's imminent and welcome departure and bemoaned the Premier's lack of stamina to truly get Brexit done. So the question then is, what are we witnessing here? Are we witnessing an unhappy Tory party worried about a group of Remainers coming back and pushing for Britain entering back into the EU in some way? Or is this a continuation of what seems to be a conspiracy around Richard Dearlove, Gwyddian Prince and others? And Brian, I'm interested in your thoughts. One of the things that this woman was giving was private number 10 briefings to Dearlove and his crowd, according to these leaked emails. And that has got to be a prosecutable offence. And I'm wondering why they haven't been prosecuted yet.
Good question, Mike. What's my reaction to it? I think what we're seeing here, we're getting a glimpse, because we can't be exactly sure of what's black and what's white. We're getting a glimpse of the real power base behind Westminster. It's becoming increasingly clear that MPs themselves do not hold power. They are simply the actors on the stage. And then behind the stage, we've got the people pulling the strings, and we're getting a glimpse as to who these people are. We could ask a similar question about the 1922 committee. What gives the 1922 committee the right to actually depose an elected, I'll put that in inverted commas, an elected prime minister? If we need to get these people out into the open and look at who they are and what their roles are.
Well, in the case of the 1922 committee, I think it's the Tory party rules, but that's...
Well, yeah, but I'm just making the point that the voter is now an irrelevance on the sideline. We didn't vote for any of these people that you're talking about here to give them a political power. But clearly they are exerting power behind the scenes, and we need the lid taken off this.
Well, I'm going to ask David for a comment in a second, but just before we do, I just want to remind everybody the position that Richard Dearlove has found himself in over the last lot of years. Because, of course, if we put Skripal or remind ourselves about the Skripal affair, Richard Dearlove effectively still controls Christopher Steele, effectively. And, of course, Christopher Steele was linked very closely with Pablo Miller, who was Skripal's MI6 handler. And so we find the same types of people and the same names in amongst that. But as well as that, we also find them in amongst the Russiagate scandal. So anyway, David, what are your thoughts on this up to this point?
Well, it's very fascinating because these are all names known to us, because when with David Ellis and others, we were concentrating on European military union in the run-up to Brexit, These are the people we kept coming up against in the pro-leave side, and we were pushing information at them regarding European military union, and there was no response. There was no campaigning, there was no headlines, there was no press releases, there was no nothing. It was quite clearly decided that European military union would not form a major part of the Brexit campaign, which we found at the time inexplicable. I think we still find it in part inexplicable. But that was a decision made in some shadowy room somewhere, and that story never hit the mainstream headlines the way it ought to have done, given the importance of the topic and the nature of the times when Brexit in Europe was all anyone was talking about.
Indeed. So if we just put the Grey Zone article back on screen here a second, this is one of the paragraphs I wanted to highlight. The cabal, for its part, was ferociously opposed to any arrangement that would keep Britain tethered to Brussels' defence structures and obligations, contending that it would undermine the US and UK-led Five Eyes global spying network. And they were also very much promoting the notion of transatlantic defence. And I'll just also, before we come on to the transatlantic defence aspect of it, I'll also mention this, the final part of this paragraph. So convinced of this was Prince that he dismissed unsubstantiated rumours of Russian support for Brexit. And if you remember, of course, all the rumours from the pro-Remain side were that Russia had been involved and had directly interfered in the whole Brexit campaign and in the vote itself. And I would just remind everybody that, of course, Richard Dearlove, as I've said a second or two ago, was absolutely behind. He was advising Christopher Steele as Christopher Steele was pulling together his dossier to promote the Russiagate scandal in the United States. So I'm not quite sure how they can say on one side, Russia is not involved in Brexit, nothing to see there, don't worry about that. But yes, Russia is absolutely involved in getting Trump elected. So there's something fishy about that. But as for the whole issue of European defence that David was talking about, and this transatlantic defence orientation that they wanted a lot more strongly, we should remember and bring King Mark Sedwill on screen here for a second, because of course once he was effectively controlling the show all through this whole period of time that this was going on. But Mark Sedwill eventually ended up being moved out of the Cabinet Office and into the Atlantic Future Forum, which is all about transatlantic defence cooperation and so on. So we see again another Dearlove linked person seeming to being pushed into a role, or carrying out a role that suited Dearlove for a while, but pushed into a role that continues to suit Dearlove at this point in time. It's interesting to see how this sort of thing, or get a glimpse of how this sort of thing works, because of course we can't know 100% exactly what's going on other than what we see through leaked emails.
Yeah, but we're getting enough to see that clearly the picture that we vote for MPs now, MPs act for us in Parliament, and they discuss policies and they protect us through defence of the nation. This is clearly too simplistic, and we've got to get into this so-called deep state, isn't it? That's the correct expression, in order to find out who these people are who seem to be pulling the strings. Plus, in many circumstances, they are outside of the law. We've got more laws coming in to give these people even more power.
Yes, and so let's have a brief look at one of the other organs of the deep state, because the BBC has been forced to apologise for this particular image that was taking place during the celebrations over the previous, just prior to the weekend, because they pushed out a little bit of video with graphics for each of the nations of the United Kingdom. But when it came to Northern Ireland, instead of using the Northern Irish flag, they used the Republic of Ireland flag. And of course, what's going on here? Was this a mistake, an accident? Was the person who was pulling the graphics together for this just ignorant of the realities of the situation? I'm afraid I cannot believe that for a second. This is the BBC we're talking about. I accept, but I can't believe that they did this by accident. There's a message here, and I just want to remind everybody of this article published by Tobias Elwood that we talked about on Friday, and remember what he was saying. that leaving this aspect of the EU was not on the ballot paper. He was talking about the single market here, nor called for by either the Prime Minister or Nigel Farage during the 2016 referendum. There was, however, much discussion about returning to a common market, which is exactly what I propose. So Tobias Ellwood is proposing that we re-enter the common market at this point, just at the point when Northern Ireland is looking like it's on pretty tricky ground with respect to where it is going to sit within the United Kingdom, or if it's going to sit within the United Kingdom. And we suddenly have the BBC accidentally deciding to use the Republic of Ireland flag to represent Northern Ireland. It all looks a bit strange.
I can't believe that the BBC would make a mistake like that, Mike. I just can't believe it. They've got too many people and they're too good at the propaganda. Perhaps we can move on to what the BBC's been up to now. Prior to the weekend, UK column was highlighting that the BBC seemed to be getting a bit tired of Ukraine. And we pointed out that on their front page here, the actual section on Ukraine was greyed out. And we just reminded people usually that happens on a computer program when the computer is not going to let you do something. So the BBC greyed out Ukraine. And we also pointed out that the upcoming celebrations meant that it was a good weekend to bury bad news. Well, what started to dribble out over the weekend, hidden by the Queen prodding her globe, fascinating image actually, that one. Maybe that requires other discussion. But if we look over here on the right-hand side, it says something very unfortunate. Russia has seized a fifth of Ukraine. And that's not some idle statement, because Zelensky himself has said it, and therefore it must be true. Well, actually, it is true. And what we started to see was slowly but surely the truth about what's been happening in Ukraine is starting to come into the mainstream media. So the BBC here had to follow it up. Ukraine war. Zelensky says Russia controls a fifth of the Ukrainian territory. And if we looked at some of the supporting articles, it got interesting because we very quickly had mention of the long-range US rockets. The Russians saying that's going to add fuel to the fire. Well, any reasonable person would say that. But also look at the headline center there. It's a picture of Boris and Joe Biden. And the headline says, "How long can Western unity over Ukraine hold?" And although the BBC isn't reporting it, of course, we've got fragmentation across Europe over sanctions, over fuel, over weapons to Ukraine. And is the thing holding together? Just about. But this is what's causing the trouble. If we get on to the reports of the battle in Ukraine, this is the key place, Severodonetsk. And we're into the Luhansk region here. And the key battle around these two conurbations, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And the key bit is that the Russians have taken most of Severodonetsk. The Ukrainians have attempted a counterattack, which has been heavily beaten off. But at the moment, the Ukrainians are in the higher ground of Lysychansk. And it's clear that the Russians intend to take this area because they can move forward to Bakhmut, and they are then in control of the major communications. So this is a key point. This is a turning point in the war in Ukraine. And to date, the Western media, the US media, have simply been ignoring it. So we're going to put on screen here that basically, having lied and misled the UK and Ukrainian public over the progress of the war in Ukraine, the truth of the Russian advances now hits home. But this has leaked out principally over the weekend when, of course, people have been highly distracted. And we're going to repeat constantly, of course, that every day that the BBC prolongs the war, the deaths continue to rise. And there is no question the minimum number of Ukrainian deaths per day is 100, with probably 500, maybe 600 people wounded. So let's take it on, because here's the BBC having to get into the meat of the subject. How long can the Western consensus hold on? And if we have a look at some comment here by Mr. Ian Bond of the Centre for European Reform, he says something very interesting. He says there's a kind of calibration going on, as though we're saying we want the Ukrainians to win, but not to win too much. So what are we seeing here, Mike? We're starting to see deep politics at work in the Ukrainian war. And as we're going to see in a minute, they're being given weapons, but is that going to make a difference? Probably not. So comment goes on here. And what are we saying here? If the Russians completely break through Ukrainian lines in the east and start heading for the Dnieper River, the question of how much territory Ukraine would be willing to sacrifice to achieve a ceasefire is going to move up the agenda. And of course, even if you just highlight that and this one here, the first one, of course, even Biden has repeated and Kissinger. But what have we got following up? It's saying by the same token, if the Ukrainian forces start driving the Russians back, there will be voices in the West saying, don't try and recapture parts of the Donbass that the Russians have controlled since 2014. So very clear that there's some very deep politics working here at the moment. And
well, indeed, but I mean, as Vanessa said on Wednesday, that even that idea of that the Russians have control since 2014 is utterly disingenuous, because of course the Russians aren't in control. They have these are their upcoming republics. They, or at least they're calling themselves republics. They've set up their own governmental institutions.
Yeah.
So this isn't that the Russians are in there controlling the governments of these countries. They are controlling their own and asking for autonomy, and they've asked consistently since 2014 for Russian support to achieve that.
Totally accept that, Mike. The key point here, though, I think being made is that even Ukraine is now beginning to understand that the advice from the West is don't even think you're getting territory back, whether it's under the control of the Russians or the Ukrainian. David, don't know whether you just want to make a quick comment before I just move on through the rest of this report.
Well, yes, a quick comment. This is an absolutely critical part of the campaign, right? Because what's happening here is Ukraine never really was an independent country. What could be happening could be the birth of a nation, that through the war and the attacks and the strife, that the viewpoint in the Ukrainian population will become so independently minded that they will want to form an independent nation separate from Russia. And that's a possibility, but then they have to hold territory. Right? They have to defend and maintain a certain amount of territory, and they have to negotiate. So firstly, there's no leadership in Ukraine actually taking them in that direction, which is reckless in the extreme. And secondly, they're facing the potential crisis in the Donbass. The Russians have not had it easy. They had, I think the last count I had was 7 attempts to close a pincer from the north with river crossings, all of which failed. But they've had this breakthrough at Popasna in the south part, where there's now a major Russian advance, and that's threatening to close off very large amounts of Ukrainian forces. That has to either be stopped, or those forces have to be evacuated, or essentially the losses might be unsustainable for the Ukrainian military. So it's very critical what happens in the next few weeks and months. And there must, at the end of the day, be a negotiated settlement. That must cede territory. Anything else is absolutely unthinkable. There's no sign of significant Ukrainian advance. There's no sign of them being able to expel the Russians by force from everywhere, the eastern Donbass, the Crimea, and all the rest of it, that they are currently claiming they will achieve victory in. This is not sensible, and they're going to have to negotiate, and there's going to have to be a peaceful and diplomatic settlement to the fighting at some point.
Okay, thank you, David. Well, you say a settlement has to happen. That's got to be the sensible, rational argument. But of course, what does the West want? What does UK want? Get in those weapon systems to prolong the war. And of course, this is the weapon system of choice. The howitzers are now old hat. We don't want to talk about Western howitzers. We're now going to talk about long-range missile systems. So again, this is the BBC report. We're going to be sending long-range missile systems to Ukraine. But interestingly, this particular headline links to 2 articles that are several days old. But nevertheless, what the BBC is trying to tell us is that basically this is going to be the weapons system that changes the war, but the actual number of them being passed over to the Ukrainians is a handful. And Putin has already said that it's irrelevant to the combat, which is the correct response. I'll just add on this page, I couldn't help notice that while the reader was looking at the reality of the war in Ukraine, the BBC also inviting us to look at the Queen and Paddington Bear, but I think we're going to be talking about that at a later date. So here's the weapons system, and what we're being told is these are better than anything the Russians have got. No, the point is that these are equivalent to weapons systems that Ukraine has had and lost in high numbers during the war to date.
Yeah, so the reason the BBC has published that and then linked back to previous articles is because the UK government issued it as a press release today or maybe yesterday. But in fact, Ben Wallace had already commented on this last week, and of course we'd mentioned it on Friday as well. But anyway, M270 weapon systems can strike targets up to 80 kilometers away with pinpoint accuracy, and it will offer a significant boost to the capability for the Ukrainian forces, said the government's press release. And alongside the weapon system, the UK will also supply M31A1 munitions at scale. There's no definition of what at scale means in this case. So let's get Ben on screen. The UK stands with Ukraine in this fight. Is the UK standing with Ukraine? I don't see that we are particularly. But
well,
anyway.
It's an interesting question because we know British Special Forces are on the ground. We're pumping in the weapons. So to a certain extent we are, but as that commentator said, it's as if we don't want the Ukrainians to win too much.
Yes, don't want them to win too much. So we stand with them and we're taking a leading role in supplying its heroic troops with the vital weapons they need to defend their country from unprovoked invasion. As Russia's tactics change, so must our support to Ukraine. These highly capable multiple launch rocket systems will enable our Ukrainian friends to better protect themselves. I thought that was interesting as Russia's tactics change.
Well, this is all part of the fact that for weeks, the Russians were failing and losing and disastrous until suddenly everyone discovers, no, they're actually winning.
That's
That's the change.
Tactical change, right? Yes, right. Okay. They decided not to lose anymore, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we'll just bring this one back. So here's the BBC commentary on it. And I'm going to come on to the longer range bit in just a second. But a game changer, ? Analysis by Paul Adams. And here's the bit that you've really given, Mike. GPS guided rockets are much more accurate than the equivalent Russian systems. And essentially, Ukraine is going to be able to hit all these targets well beyond its current reach. Command and control centers, logistic hubs, and the Russian batteries that Ukrainian troops pinned down in Donbass, they are fighting over vast areas. We're talking about a handful of these things, a handful. So this is complete nonsense and misleading hype for the BBC. But of course, what is it really doing? Dragging the war out. And the comment on the longer range is that nobody wants to mention, except a few media sources, that the Ukrainians are not being given the ultra long range systems, which would allow them to attack deep into Russia. And the inference is that not even the US or the West is silly enough to put those sorts of weapons in the Ukrainian hands. So the systems the Ukrainians have been given are not that brilliant, but also they're very limited in range. Now, what's happening on the ground? Well, of course, is death and injury. And I just wanted to focus in for a couple of minutes on this article from The Guardian. Russian says Tory MP's son involved in killing Chechen commander in Ukraine. Encourage people to go and have a look at this article. And here's Ben Grant, the star of the article, a former Royal Marine, son of Conservative MP. This a picture taken on the way out to Ukraine. And of course, what do we see? Gentleman right on the picture. He's looking very happy. It's all a bit of a laugh. He's off with the boys. So this is some of the comment that he made. We're going to wait and see what the situation is as we get further in. It's all going to depend on how well the Ukrainians are doing in different parts and also where they need us. If they need us to be an independent unit because of the specialist skills within each group and each team that comes out, maybe an independent unit is what gets formed. So all very confident, all full of the joys of spring, until, oh dear, he's involved in combat. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. I was, quote, terrified, unquote, but driven to complete my most important goal, which at the time was getting him, that's a badly wounded man, and my team out of danger. So suddenly the smirk has gone. This man is not so cocky. Of course, he can come out of Ukraine and talk about what happened to him, whereas other people have got to stay on the front line. But this is classic. This is the demonstration that Western military people, even if they've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, and this is no disrespect to them, but they are being faced with a completely different war in Ukraine. The veterans today picked up on this story as well. Worst fighting I've ever experienced, and they give a lot more detail, which readers can have a look at themselves. But the key bit about this is that Ben is talking about shooting to kill other people before essentially there was an ambush, and that meant that he ended up having to bring out a man who'd had his leg severely injured. Now, what fascinates me are two women involved in this, because on the right we've got Liz Truss, who has said several times that young men and women should go out from UK in order to go on that battlefield and experience what Ben has experienced. And on the left is Ben's mother, the Conservative MP Helen Grant. Now, not suggesting she even knew her son was going there, but I think the key question is Helen Grant should surely be asking some questions of Liz Truss, Mike, don't you think?
Should be. And in fact, she didn't know initially because he didn't tell her that he was going.
That's what the papers report,
Yeah.
that even his own family did not know that he was going out there. And of course, parents cannot be fully responsible for a grown-up child, but I think there's some questions to be asked.
Yes. Just a bit of news from Russia, and this is Maria Zakharova here, reported in TASS, saying that a number of countries, including Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Montenegro, have closed. I mean, basically all the NATO countries plus a couple of others that are around Serbia have closed their airspace to Russian aircraft, particularly Sergei Lavrov's aircraft. So any diplomatic mission, he was intending to be in Serbia today, I believe, is not possible to take place. But David, the Russians have nothing to worry about with NATO expansion.
Yeah, well, this is the idea. You see, the basic principle is NATO's completely benign, right? Western liberalism is the definition of goodness, Mike, and who wouldn't want to sign up for that? And anyone who doesn't agree, well, they're evil by definition, and therefore they can have no complaints whatever we do, because we're on the side of goodness and rightness, and they're on the side of evil. And don't think anything more about it than that, Mike, because otherwise you'll be peddling nasty disinformation.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of NATO expansionism, let's have a look at exercise Ball Tops, which began yesterday, Brian. Royal Navy involved in it, of course. So exercise Ball Tops 22 kicked off yesterday. It's hosted by Sweden. So we've got 40 NATO ships, including USS Kearsarge, which is the largest of the ships that's there. No one in Stockholm can miss that there is a big American ship here in our city, and that was Michael Biden, who's the Supreme Commander of the Swedish Armed Forces. There are more capabilities on this ship, this is with respect to the USS Kearsarge, than I could gather in a garrison, he said. And so this is obviously partly related to Sweden's efforts to join NATO, but there's clearly a message being sent there as well to Sweden that if they do join NATO, they're going to be expected to actually front up with some material of their own.
Indeed, 40 ships, big exercise, and coming at this particular time with Ukraine, in my view, clearly designed to put more pressure on the Russians.
Yes.
David, I think you wanted a quick comment.
Well, just if you look at the Crimea campaign, which is part of a larger war to control Russian expansion in the 19th century, it obviously had a very large naval component in the Baltic. It just seems a little interesting that we're doing exactly the same playbook again.
Yes.
Okay, well, can we trust anything that we hear from Western or perhaps a bulk of US media at the moment? Certainly, we've got to be careful. Now, last week, we covered this story of a Ukrainian student up in Edinburgh who'd got very unhappy because she believed that one of the lecturers was putting out misinformation, or was it disinformation? Let's have a look. The victim was Tim Haywood. And apparently he'd been tweeting out the wrong sorts of things, like saying the destruction of Mariupol theatre was broadcast worldwide as an atrocity warranting the West's intervention. But what do we know of the reality? Well, of course, if you ask those sorts of questions, you're going to be in big trouble. So the young lady went off. She told BBC Radio 4, the moment we start to equate the two sides in the story is the moment we lose our humanity. The oppressor, in this case Russia, should not be given the same kind of platform as those who are being oppressed. Now, was this lady an innocent or a political manipulator? We don't know. She could be either, or maybe even a bit of both. But I wanted to highlight that interaction on propaganda with this. So a little while ago, the BBC was busy reporting this particular lady who was making all sorts of claims about children and later rape. So her name is Denisova, and as a representative of the Ukrainian government, she was putting out a variety of messages which were deeply disturbing. This one, when our children are taken out, they destroy the national identity, deprive our country of the future. They teach our children there in Russia the history that Putin has told everyone. The BBC said Denisova did not provide any evidence to support her claims, and the BBC has not been able to verify them. Nevertheless, the BBC gives her lots of print space and lots of media space. Here's another one: Ukraine conflict, Russian soldiers raped me and killed my husband. If we blow this one up so we can read it, Ukraine's Ombudsman for Human Rights, Denisova, says they're documenting several such cases. 25 girls and women aged 14 to 24 were systematically raped during the occupation in the basement of one house in Bucha. 9 of them are pregnant, she said. So this is pretty harrowing stuff. And there was more detail given in the BBC article, including this business, was there more evidence? To which the reply was, it's impossible at the moment because not everyone is willing to tell us what happened to them. The majority of them currently call for psychological support, so we cannot record those as crimes unless they give us their testimony. So I'm going to say the propaganda went out there. It spread far and wide. This is DW America. Russian soldiers kept and raped 25 Ukrainian women. But suddenly we have this from a few days ago. Zero Hedge, Ukraine fires own human rights chief for perpetuating Russian troop systematic rape stories. And here's part of the article saying that a number of other outlets, Interfax, Politico, the Wall Street Journal and others, reporting that she's been fired precisely for perpetuating fantastical claims of mass rape, but without providing evidence. A lot more detail if you go to the article and have a look in it. And what's clear is that her dismissal was a conscious decision by the Ukrainian government, forced really by some non-governmental organizations pointing out that she was making insensitive and unverifiable statements about alleged Russian sex crimes. So this is the reality. The strange thing is that if you do a search, as I did earlier today on BBC website, you get absolutely nothing on this lady. The material of her claims is still up there, but nothing about her dismissal. And I think as an example of the reason that we cannot trust the BBC, we couldn't get better.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, let's move on. Did you have a comment, David?
Well, just to close off the piece, Mike, Tim Hayward, the professor at the centre of this furore in Edinburgh, who has been attacked in the Times and elsewhere on more than one occasion for his stance on exploring the realities of the Ukraine war, was also tweeting out this week about the Bilderberg conference. So he seems to be unbowed.
Well, and indeed he is. And of course, he was a long-standing member of the Media on Trial group that ran a number of events, which were also censored one or two occasions and resulted in other attacks on him, Piers Robinson and Vanessa Bailey and others. So he has been doing this for a long time now and has a good track record if anybody wants to follow him on Twitter and elsewhere. Now, if you'd like to support the UK column, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. Your help would be very much appreciated and is very much needed. Or you can pick something up at the UK Column shop. I'd just like to thank everybody that has been doing that over the last period. But please do also share material on the various platforms as well. Now, David, where does that take us? The Bank of England is now the Treasury's poodle.
Yes, so this was an article in the Telegraph a short while ago. Fascinating article, and I've got a little bit of detail on this for you. It's written by Neil Record, more on him in a moment. And he's looking at the Bank of England's performance, and he says it's possible that the answer to why they're not raising interest rates more. It's possible that the answer lies not only in the extraordinary loss of de facto independence exhibited by the Bank of England in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, but also in the structures of the bank's own balance sheet. And this is what we're about to explore. This is a really bit of information on Neil Record, British businessman. He used to work in the Bank of England. He was an economist early in his career in the bank. He's one of the earliest specialists in currency management. And he's also written books on Sir Humphrey's legacy, facing up to the true cost of public sector pensions. And public sector pensions, the UK's second national debt. So he's not afraid to go into areas that will annoy people, and he has got a track record of doing so. Now, back to the article. So he's writing here, stripped down to the bare bones, QE, quantitative easing, means the Bank of England has lent the UK government around 850 billion in fixed interest long-term loans or gilts. To finance these loans, the Bank of England has borrowed the money from commercial banks, paying the bank rate as interest. Now, I wasn't quite clear on that myself. I thought it was very interesting. He continues, the rate of interest payable on this overdraft is variable. The interest rate received from the loans to the government has averaged little more than 1% a year. They're currently paying 1% interest. But it's capable of being overwhelmed by changes in the market value of gilts, which are traded on the open markets and can fluctuate substantially. Now, we get to the core of it, the heart of it. What has actually happened is that a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bank of England, the Bank of England Asset Purchase Facility Fund Limited, has bought the gilts from the government, financed by borrowing short-term from the Bank of England. In turn, the Bank of England has financed the loan to the APF by borrowing from the commercial banks. In this upside-down world of central banking, the Bank of England's borrowing from commercial banks is called reserve balances, on which it pays the bank interest rate. So I thought we'd have a little look at the Bank of England Asset Purchase Facility Fund Limited. And you see here the directors are all senior people in the Bank of England. Andy Haldane was in post at the time of the last published annual report, which was up to February 2021. When we get into where the risk lies, the company's operations are fully indemnified by HM Treasury. The company is not exposed to financial risk, but manages the relevant risks on the underlying portfolio on the Treasury's behalf. So this is already starting to look not very independent, Mike. If we go to the financial results, the balance sheet totaled 788 billion at the end of February 21. And the principal liability was a loan from the Bank of England of 773 billion. The fair value of the company's holdings of securities was 785 billion, 766 billion in gilts, and 19 billion in corporate bonds. This goes on. It says asset purchases affect the economy. So they're talking about risks and uncertainties here. They say, first of all, they repeat the fact that the company is indemnified by the Treasury. It will return any surplus to the Treasury, but any losses will be payable by the Treasury, by you and me through our taxes. Asset purchases affect the economy and ultimately inflation. Interesting that they admit this quite clearly in these documents, through a variety of channels via households, corporates, and financial markets and institutions. So they then outline, they give a little graph. This graph tells you almost nothing. It's stylized. Stylized means so abstract as to be essentially meaningless. But essentially, asset purchases go through influencing gilt yields, yields on other assets, exchange rates, cost of borrowing, wealth, spending and income, and ultimately affect inflation and growth. Now, I would argue about the growth, but there's no disputing, this is from their own documents, that asset purchases, the QE program, affects and causes inflation. It's in their own documentation. Quickly looking at their income for the year, this is quite interesting. Total income has got brackets around it, minus 39.4 billion. Well done. And that will be covered by a net indemnity from the Treasury of 40.1 billion. So we're already paying for the privilege of this facility. And we've got a little graph here from the Telegraph again. So it's showing how the bank has been paying QE dividends to the Treasury. That's going to go negative. So the Treasury will actually be paying the bank for this facility. And we've got here also the financial statement, the balance sheet. So they've got this 788 billion in total assets, just to confirm the size of it. Couple of other, whoops, beg your pardon, that's the wrong way. Have I lost the ability to move my slide?
I'll move
there
it
we
on.
go.
Right, there you go.
Right,
There's
next
the
one. There we go. The couple of other quick interesting things. 5 billion is invested in Europe. The maturity analysis here shows that there's something like 230, getting on for 230 billion of these gilts become mature in the next 5 years. So they're going to be affected significantly by inflation. And could you just hit the next one there, Mike? Yep. So back to the Telegraph article. So he continues, to add to the complexity, the Bank of England has agreed to keep the interest rates on its holdings, not to keep the interest on its holdings of government debts, but to remit the receipts back to the Treasury. Conversely, the Bank of England has effectively charged APF 0 for the 870-odd billion pound loan. Finally, the Treasury has agreed to indemnify the Bank of England against any losses on the APF's gilt portfolio in return for the Bank of England paying the Treasury any profits. If I were a lawyer trying to tease out the real relationships that lie behind these erudite and complex arrangements, what would I say? I would say that from a financial perspective, the APF via the Bank of England is in effect a poodle of the Treasury with no independent financial existence. Interestingly, sorry, next slide, thanks, Mike. Interestingly, to comply with UK company law, every subsidiary company must report its ultimate parent, and the APF reports the Treasury, not the Bank of England, as the ultimate parent. Hence, the complicated intermediation of the Bank of England is in fact a sham. What has happened is that the government, via the Treasury, has chosen to borrow money at short-term rates from the banking system, rather than sell long-term debt to the non-banking private sector, pension funds, life insurance companies, etc. And to put some meat on the bones, a 3% rise in long-term interest rates, which is well within historical norms, would mean a fall of at least 20% in the value of the gilt holdings. This would open up a £170 billion hole in the balance sheet, which the Treasury is contractually obliged to cover. The Office for Budget Responsibility's latest forecast for government deficit is 99 billion. That could be blown up by this additional government expenditure, nearly trebling it to 270 billion. So what this says here is that the whole QE system, when this started, not only did it generate inflation, not only has it been at the very heart of the inflation we're now seeing, but it also represented the surrender of any independence on the part of the Bank of England. They're now completely constrained by the relationship with the Treasury and by their own balance sheet. And the one tool that they have, which they tell us they're going to use wisely to save the economy from disaster, which is interest rate policy, they can't actually use without blowing up their own balance sheet and wrecking the government finances in the process, because the entire 780 billion QE programme is on essentially a short-term adjustable rate mortgage.
Yes, and that undoubtedly applies to the Fed as well, perhaps.
We'll need to look into that one. I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, well, if I was to ask, could you think of one global leader that might be actually talking about this? I wonder who that would be. Let's bring him on screen because here he is, Vladimir Putin, and he's was speaking to the Russian media on Friday, and he said this: the money supply in the United States grew by 5.9 trillion in less than 2 years, from February 2020 to the end of 2021. Unprecedented productivity of the money printing machines. The total cash supply grew by 38.6%. So it was a mistake made by the US financial and economic authorities. It was nothing to do with Russia's actions in Ukraine. It's totally unrelated. So, David, that's the first point. He's bang on the money there, as you said to me earlier, and that's quite an unfortunate term. But anyway, he's absolutely correct. And the UK and the US doing exactly the same kinds of things.
Yes, and it's demonstrably accurate because you can see when the inflation kicked in, and it was long before any action by Russia, military or otherwise.
Yes.
This has been generated by the QE program and by the response to COVID, which was more QE.
Indeed. So then he went on to talk about food supplies, and he said and that was the first step, and a big one, towards the current unfavorable food market situation, because in the first place, food prices immediately went up, they grew. But he went on to say that in the current agricultural year of 2021-2022, we, that's in Russia, will export 37 million tons. And I believe we will raise these exports to 50 million tons in 2022-2023. That's of wheat. And that's at the time that the UK is reducing its tonnage of wheat produced, because we would prefer to grow wildflower meadows and plant new trees on excellent agricultural land instead. But this is a key point. He has turned his agricultural industry around in the last couple of decades, and they are a massive exporter of wheat. But of course, just as with oil and gas, we can't buy that and we can't buy that, and therefore the prices aren't coming down at all, because we can't. And they must. Then he went on to talk about the situation, the accusations that the Ukrainian situation is stopping Ukrainian wheat from getting out of the country. And he's making the point, well, actually, the main reason that this stuff can't get out of Ukraine through the ports is because of the mines that have been laid by the Ukrainians and the ships that they had sunk on purpose in the Black Sea to make it difficult to enter the ports in the south of Ukraine. And again, that's another accurate point. And he said, and at the same time, they began to belittle the importance of conventional types of energy, including and above all hydrocarbons, because he is absolutely attacking the Green New Deal in this report as well. So again, undoubtedly somebody will say that we're taking a pro-Putin line by putting this up, but the fact is none of this is being discussed by the Western media, and the fact is these are the words that he said, David.
Yeah, it's not a pro-Putin line. We've been saying this for years, and he's actually been quite gentle with them. They're not belittling hydrocarbons. They're demonizing hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are the great evil. We've got people covering government buildings in Edinburgh with red paint because there's a suggestion we're going to open an oil field. Such as the hysteria about the effects of hydrocarbons that have been stoked up in the West. And it is, of course, factually incorrect. and very harmful. And I think that Putin's comments there are correct and actually quite gentle and mild.
Well, that could be a function of translation, of course. We're not entirely sure, but anyway, I take your point. But let's move on then to the Telegraph and Sri Lanka and the question. Well, the whole issue of, Brian was talking about the issue of rape in Ukraine, and at the same time, the UK government has been pushing this idea over the last couple of, the last 10 years or so, that we've got to get Ukraine out of war zones and so on, because it shouldn't be used as a weapon of war. But in fact, in Sri Lanka, it's selling sex is being used in order to just survive the economic turmoil over there.
Yes, and this is the point. We've covered Sri Lanka a few times because it seems to be, the most critical case in the world economy at the moment, and it's sallied today as to what it actually means for people on the ground. Quote, "It's my only hope," end quote. Women forced to sell sex to survive as Sri Lanka's turmoil escalates. So the journalist describes a diminutive female figure enters a brightly lit courtyard, tugging a blue Disney-themed dress below her knees and swatting away the mosquitoes. With a sigh, she expresses her disappointment that it's only a journalist who has entered the makeshift brothel and not a client. Can I change that?
No, it's already. It was already changed.
What? Okay. Sorry, beg your pardon.
Just keep going.
Right. So Sri Lanka is teetering dangerously on the verge of total collapse. There's a chronic nationwide shortage of food, medicines, fuel. Deadly violence it threatens to break out. It's not always been that way. As recently as 2019, Sri Lanka was heralded by the World Bank as a lower middle income country, a developing economic success story. And a large part of this was derived from the booming apparel and textile industry that in 2019 exported £4.4 billion worth of goods. Factories were largely staffed by women. But women working in the garment sector have now seen the daily wages of about 1,000 Sri Lankan rupees, or £2.20, become worthless because of inflation, which is expected to reach 40%. So the point I'm making here is it's the inflation that's causing dislocation in the economy. And the dislocation in a fragile economy like Sri Lanka is the difference between people having a regular, if poorly paid work on which they can survive and develop their economy, their families, and actually make progress, and in this case being driven into prostitution. That's the effect inflation's having there. The article closes with the madam in the brothel saying, "I've had two girls call me from way up in the northwestern Sri Lanka asking to work here. They just don't have any opportunities because of the crisis. The girls are getting into this industry. They're helpless people. I'm keeping them off the streets." So this is the situation in Sri Lanka, and it shows that it's the poorest and most vulnerable that are affected most severely by inflation. And then when they're desperate people do desperate things.
Yes. Okay, well, let's put this on screen then. This was reported last week and we didn't cover it. This was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Brian and David, suggesting that Prince Andrew should be forgiven for the sex abuse scandal. I noted that both he and Prince Andrew were not able to attend the celebrations for the Queen last week because they both tested for COVID. I'm just wondering, were they together at some point? I'm not sure, but anyway, just wanted to get your thoughts on this. I mean, it seems to me that if there's to be any forgiveness, there has to be some sign of contrition or some acceptance that there was wrongdoing done. And of course, we haven't had any of that yet. David?
Well, this is correct. Forgiveness requires, firstly, the request for forgiveness. It requires someone to say, "I was wrong and I'm sorry." So there must be honesty, there must be openness, and there must be at least the expression of regret. We haven't seen that, I'm afraid.
Yes. You any thoughts?
Well, I just come back to when Welby was in front of the ICSA child abuse inquiry to answer questions as to why the Church of England had not protected abuse of survivors, or hadn't protected them at the time. And Did he give an apology? Yes. Was it credible? No, not in my opinion. So it's just amazing to me how the fact it's royalty, it's Epstein, it was big news. You get Welby standing up to say this man should be forgiven. What is he doing with all the other wrongs in the world? I don't have any time for him, really.
No, indeed. Okay, let's move on to Scotland, David. And well, lots going on there at the moment.
Yes, if you want to find truly epic levels of financial mismanagement, Sri Lanka's one option, Scotland's another one. We've got here politics.co.uk reporting, this was from about a week ago, we were trying to cover it, but time didn't allow. News analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies shows that the Scottish Government is set to report a £3.5 billion black hole in funding. So their director, David Phillips, said a series of expensive spending commitments on top of underlying spending pressures means the Scottish Government faces a multi-billion budget shortfall over the next 4 years under current forecasts. And he says that the Scottish Spending Review could see announcements of pretty hefty tax rises or cuts to spending on lower priority services, or even the abandonment of some policy commitments to bring the budget into balance. This was also shown in this report in the Scottish Sun. They say cash woes, Scottish Government faces multi-billion pound shortfall. And they also report, the report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Scottish Government will have to choose some combination of axing, taxing and hoping for the UK Government to top up its spending plans. Would you like to guess how that would work out? And I've got here one final article from the UK Government back in 2019 to prove this problem is not recent. Scottish income tax shortfall offset by UK funding. Scottish Government's £941 million income tax shortfall was offset by £737 million increase in UK Government funding. The Scottish Government raised less than expected tax in 2017-2018, but because of a risk-sharing framework, about 80% of it was bailed out by the UK Government. Now,
right, sorry, David, just before you move on, take that then, that if it was 941 million in 2019, and what is it now, 2 billion or so?
3.5 billion over 4 years.
Right, well, that's quite an acceleration.
No, that's kind of, well, if you don't take into account the bailing out from the UK taxpayer, it's about pro rata.
Right. Okay.
So no, the 3.5 billion is the aggregate over 4 years.
Right.
The aggregate black hole. Now, part of the reason for this is the Scottish Government has decided that higher taxes, that will fix things. So they've put up the tax rates on every Scot that's successful. So you pay much more tax in Scotland than you do in England. And this has resulted in the total tax take from the Scottish people falling because the Laffer curve. So we've got the Laffer curve illustrated here. And what this shows is if you tax at 0%, well, you get zero money. If you tax at 100%, you still get zero money because who's going to work? It's just all stolen by the government. And at some point, you've got a maximising revenue point, and at some other point with less tax, you've got a maximising of growth point. So if you go beyond the maximising revenue point, which the Scottish Government clearly has, because they know nothing about economics, you actually increase the tax rate and have declining revenues. So the Scottish Government has proven, once again, the Laffer curve is real, and it's no laughing matter, and we are in big trouble.
But they're going to reset their public services. How are they going to do that? By sacking a lot of people?
Well, yes. So Kate Forbes, our finance secretary, chose the word reset. Wonder wherever she got that word from, Mike. More on that in a moment. So we're going to reset public services. So she said, Scotland, not the Scottish Government, with collective responsibility, Scotland must rethink how it delivers its public services in the wake of COVID and Brexit. Did you like that? It's COVID and Brexit that's to blame. It's not us. It's not our tax rates. No, it's COVID and Brexit. And they now needed, she said, the public sector had grown for years, but now needed a reset to become more efficient. So there we go. So the overall Scottish budget is due to increase from 41.8 to 47.5 billion, but that's over 4 years, and that won't nearly cover what they've planned. And she continued, the Scottish Government cannot prioritise everything. We do need to reshape and refocus the public sector post-COVID, all COVID's fault, and the spending review calls upon all of the public sector to look creatively at ways to sustainably address that challenge. Okay, we're using all the buzzwords. Ms Forbes said that the government would seek to ensure public sector workers were given, quote, fair, end quote, pay increases. You can decide for yourself what that means. And warned it was having to operate within a severely limited budget. She said this could be achieved through, quote, effective vacancy and recruitment management, end quote, techniques. I think that means sacking people, Mike.
I think the last count was 17,000, wasn't it?
Yeah. And this would allow remaining staff to be given a year-on-year pay increases. Yes, they're going to reduce the public sector, the civil service payroll in Scotland quite heavily because, well, they've been buying people's loyalty for quite some time, and they've eventually run out of our money and indeed the money that they're getting from England. So they've hit the buffers, I'm afraid. It then gets quite funny. She said there should be a renewed focus on well-being. We still don't think they can define it, but we're going to focus in a renewed manner upon it, with bodies being invited to take part in a 4-day working week pilot. My, oh my, I think Brian might have something to add to that one, as well as continuing to make better use of technology for hybrid and home working. So back to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, they're pointing out that the budgets for the police, justice, universities and rural affairs are going to be down 8% in real terms. Spending on enterprise, tourism and trade promotion, in other words, anything that might actually help, down 16%. Health spending up 2.6% in real terms. That over 4 years, that will not cover it. And social security spending up 48%. So they're still planning to buy people. But I love it when they use the word reset, particularly when it's a Scottish minister using the word reset, because under Scots law, and we go here, crime.scot is not a Scottish Government website. I must point that out. It's nothing to do with the Scottish Government. Crime.scot is a guide to Scottish criminal law. And reset in Scots law is the dishonest possession of goods obtained by another by way of theft, robbery, fraud, or embezzlement, in the knowledge that they were obtained that way. Now, I point out to you, Mike, taxation is theft. And when she says we're going to have reset, she's absolutely correct. Reset's also been privy to the retention of dishonestly obtained property. And it goes on there to say that you've got actus reus possession. More detail is in the website. You don't have to personally handle the stolen goods to be considered in possession. So she is in possession of stolen goods, and the problem is there's not clearly enough stolen goods to go around, and we are going to see huge turmoil in the Scottish public sector because the SNP government has been using this money largely from the south to buy loyalty and buy quietness and buy some sort of appearance of progress and success. As they've made horrible decisions. And the bill is becoming due, and it's going to be very, very horrible when the people that they have bought find out that they've been conned.
Well, I'm smiling, David, as the definition of reset, truly wonderful. But of course, it reminds me of the definition of common purpose, because I've reported over many years on a pernicious charity called Common Purpose. But I think I'm right in saying that common purpose is also a crime under Crime Act law. So it does seem strange that these terms get picked up. But it's also strange that when we put the news for UK Column together, we're not always talking to each other on an hour-by-hour basis. And I'd picked up on a Guardian headline today, which was this: thousands of UK workers begin world's biggest trial of a 4-day week, with work changed forever by the pandemic. There's the driver. Businesses are testing where the pilot represents a recognition that the new frontier for competition is quality of life. I think I understand that sentence, but let's have a look at what's coming. So here we are. More than 3,300 workers from 70 UK companies, ranging from a local chippy to large financial firms, start working a 4-day week from Monday with no loss of pay in the world's biggest trial of the new working system. The pilot is running for 6 months and is being organised by 4-Day Week Global in partnership with the think tank Autonomy, the 4-Day Week campaign, and researchers at Cambridge University, Oxford University, and Boston College. And the trial's based on a 100-80-100 model, which is 100% of pay for 80% of the time in exchange for a commitment to maintain 100% productivity. So I was intrigued that suddenly we've got a global trial popped out of nowhere, as you can imagine, having a look at a 4-day week. So I did a little bit of research for our viewers and listeners. This is Autonomy. Now remember, Mike, it's independent, so you can trust it. It's an independent, progressive research organisation, focuses on tackling climate change. So climate change comes first, the future of work, probably we won't have any, and economic planning, which David's just given us a good overview. And always look at the people, because we've got a mixture of media, communications, London College of Communication, lecturer in digital economy. We've got a lady working in the Gender, Sexuality and Feminine Studies program of Duke University. Quite an interesting mix of people who are now working to say that we're really going to go into a 4-day working week. But my question as always is, who are these people? I'm not sure I'm allowed to use the H word, but who the H are these people? Because they seem to have enormous power. Here's 4-Day Week Global with a gentleman called Andrew Barnes, and he's an entrepreneur, I'm having trouble with that word. Help me out, Mike.
Philanthropist.
Thank you very much. And made a career of market-changing innovation and industry digitization. Now, I believe he's based in New Zealand. How does he pop up in this trial associated with UK universities? I don't know. Here we've got the key. This is the engine of it. And this is the Oxford University Wellbeing Research Centre. So, David, I think this answers part of your question. We're not too sure what well-being is, but we're spending millions, billions maybe, researching it. What you're looking on screen is actually a BT study being presented into well-being and performance at call centres. That's going to keep us fed. If we look at the people again, well, it's just fascinating because we've got a mixture of professors, government ministers. Top right, we've got a Chinese hedge fund, so that's reassuring. Well, we've got all the American aircraft carriers out there because of those nasty Chinese. Actually, they should be looking for the Chinese in Oxford because apparently they're going to be cutting our working week to 4 days. We've got educators, entrepreneurs, and same question, can we trust them with the future? So, David, I think it's quite clear COVID-19, the pandemic that never was, is being used to kickstart the Great Reset. And as part of that Great Reset, you're either going to be on income from the state or you're going to be working as few hours as possible. But maybe I'm just cynical.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very strange thing because when this was originally put forward, it was a bizarre notion that came from the idea there was only so much work to go round, and unemployment was caused by some people working too hard and having all the work, and other people having nothing to do, right? Because work's a kind of zero-sum game. This is economic imbecility and doesn't have any relationship with reality. Now it's, oh, no. It's if we work 4 days, the efficiency is such that you'll just produce the same amount. Now, if that's the case, go to it. And why would any company not buy into that if it's true? I find it difficult to imagine how someone working in a chip shop can make as many chips if he's only there 80% of the time. But maybe I just don't know enough about the fish and chip business.
It could well be. Look, we're out of time, David, but just very quickly then, Royal Naval Shipbuilding supports 15,000 Scottish jobs. Is that where they're going to send all these unemployed public sector workers?
Most of them are
Let's hope not. We need people who work hard to build our ships. The point I'm making here is this is actually a success story, such as it is. Anytime the government takes money, it's destroying other jobs to make the jobs you can see. You've got to bear that in mind. But nonetheless, there is a success story here in that they're building ships and they're building more ships, and it's generally being extremely well done, and it contrasts with the Scottish government taking a lot of money from people and then actually wasting it and failing to build ships. So there are things that are worse than government taking your money to build things that you wouldn't necessarily choose. It's when government takes your money and just wastes it and achieves almost nothing, which is what the Scottish government has been specialising in.
Yes, okay. And
we do have a final slide.
We do. Here it is.
And this is a man driving the car with is marked puberty blockers, and he's just run over a teenager with mental health written on his back. And he says, "Don't worry, this is reversible."
Yes. Okay.
And there's another subject.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, we will be doing an extra, and as Brian mentioned, we'll be, well, what did we say we were going to talk an extra? Oh yes, Paddington. That's true.
Paddington Bear and the Queen.
Yes.
A lot more important subject than people may think.
That's it.
Okay, we'll end it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to our viewers in UK and overseas, and just well done with all the support. It's been fantastic. If you're not a subscriber though, perhaps you could you decide to sign up with us, because every little counts. Thanks very much. We'll be back in a few minutes with extra time. Bye-bye.